Let's talk about your books. 10 years ago, you wrote your first book. Since then, you've written 4 more. What was it that inspired you to become an author, or to want to become an author, to sit down and put pen to paper?
I'd say two things. I was a columnist on a radio show, and it was a call-in show, and I every 2 weeks I had to have a new topic. So it might have been how care and feeding of your banker, or what does a bespoke balance sheet look like, or whatever it was. And I would spend some time thinking about that. So I'd have several pages of notes. And it was a call-in show, and so if somebody called in while I was talking, even if the topic was 10, it was 5 light years from my topic, we would answer the question. So if I'm talking about care and feeding of your banker, and the guy would call in and say, hey, I want to buy my brother-in-law's bar in Milford, then we'd have a 10-minute conversation with the guy that wanted to buy a bar in Milford. So, which is fine. It was, according to the host, that was great radio. But
And this is live radio?
This is live radio. So there was that was that. So, so I had all these, I had 40 of these outlines, and probably in terms of broadcast minutes, maybe there was 40 minutes of it that actually hit the air. So I thought it's like, well, I don't want to waste all this. And I had a conversation with an author who happened to be Matthew Kelly, who said, I showed you those topics, and you told me, he said, well, you probably remember this, but you said, so you want to write a book, and then you kind of shook your head, and then you said, there's only 3 reasons to write a book, and that's to be rich and to be famous, or to be known as an authority on something, and the first 2 aren't going to happen. So I went into it eyes.
Did I say that?
You did say that. I can tell you exactly where we were sitting. So I thought, okay, you said, let me think about it, and you came back and you said, hey, can you divide this into a first, sort of a pre-opening, early stage, mid stage, late stage, business issues, and and then I said, yeah, sure. Then you said you need to write a story. So that's what, it's funny. I thought of the story right away. And so it wasn't hard to do that for me. That was, maybe it's just sort of, the, Irish storyteller in me, but it kind of all came to me at once, and I knew how I'd fit them in. So that part wasn't too difficult.
And if someone came to you today who'd never written a book and said, Pat, I see you've written a bunch of books here, I'm thinking of writing a book, what advice would you have for them?
Well, have something to say, and have a position on what you're going to write that has to be from a vantage point that you know a lot about and other people will find interesting. It was like in my last book, I had a reviewer said it was like sitting next to Pat at a bar stool, and he was telling me what not to do in business. And I thought, I don't think it necessarily needed to be a bar stool, but I mean, that was my view of that book. Hey, here's the things you shouldn't do if you really want to be successful.
Yeah.
I was glad I wouldn't have thought of it that way, but and I didn't think about, but I think about talking to the person directly, not to, a vast audience. I wish it was more vast, but you're talking to a person who's either in a business or thinking about a business, or has already made a couple of these mistakes and doesn't want to make any more, or can't afford to.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite of your own books?
Geez, I don't know. I mean, actually, I think the one that there's no us in business, talking about just the idea that not everybody is going to be a good partner. You may not be a good partner yourself, and the idea that you don't necessarily run out and find someone to go into business with just because you got an idea and just because you happen to need money. So I think it's one of the biggest and most common mistakes is partnering up. As I say, it's not like tennis or a golf game where you need somebody else to play. You can do it by yourself.
Yeah.
And most of them don't work. So
most partnerships.
Yep. And they're expensive to get out of.
Yeah. Why don't business partnerships work?
I think there's a what would I say, a disconnect between the two levels of passion. Somebody is super passionate about the idea and got it started, and they're not only passionate about it today, they're passionate about staying on top of it and reading and how do we push this thing forward. And the other person can't match that. They can't. They're just, they're never going to be at that level. And as I tell people who are planning on going to business together, I said, take a personality test. Let's see if you're compatible. Trade personal balance sheets to see if you can, if there's going to be a capital call, can you make it? And if somebody has absolutely nothing to lose, then, they have nothing to lose. So, and you do, then there's going to be a different level of fear, and fear is a great motivator, maybe the best, right? And so I just think that I tell people, look, if you're planning on just having an okay business, then partnerships are fine, but nobody goes into a business with idea, we're just going to do okay. They want to be, at least one of the two sees it as as a launching pad for something great. And I say, most businesses, the partners get along fine if it's just going fine. If it goes poorly and it's heading down the drain, then there's usually, finger pointing, and it's usually one person's is not pulling their weight or whatever. The other time, it just as commonly, I would say, if it's doing really, really well, then there's probably one of the partners who's really stood out. And that partner looks at the other partner and says, I know we thought this was going to be good at 50-50, but I don't see it at 50-50 anymore because you fill in the blank. I'm rowing way faster than you. This just isn't going to work. And what I tell people is, if you're going to start a business, and unless there's a need that the business has that is absolutely critical, and you can't find somebody to do that job unless you offer them a piece of the business, then pay them cash, do whatever you can do, but don't bring them in as a partner.
Mm.
And if later on they earn that right, that's fine. But it's just, I sort of, what I see with a lot of things, it's more common that the highest, if you think about whose engine revs the highest, if the partnership stays together, the person whose engine revs the highest will end up just sort of slowing down, because it's like, there's really no reason for me to rev at 10,000 RPMs when everybody else is at 7, because, my motor can't push this any faster. So I'm just going to sort of, lay back, or else they'll leave and start another business, this time by themselves. And that happens all the time.
So what makes a great partner?
I think somebody who has complementary skills, but has, they don't have to be every bit as talented as the other person. I just think they need to be driven, and they have to understand, know their limitations, and just like way you need to know yours. And I think, if, hey, this person's way better at sales, I'm way better at production, and that's what we're going to do, is fine. And I understand that sales might be paid more than production, then I'm okay with that. Then you just have to understand what your roles are and make sure that people are compensated at the appropriate level for the roles they're playing. I mean, you don't see like let's say a third down running back in the NFL who's really good at catching the pass over the middle, when it's 3rd and 8, but that's what he does, and the quarterback's in for every play. So that third down back doesn't say, well, gee, I'm really good as a third down back, I need to make as much money as the quarterback. It's like, no, you don't. I mean, that is a specific role. That's what you do. You're great at it, but here's the pay band for that. And this is what you make. So those are tough calls to make, and conversations to have with a partner. But if you're going to remain partners, you have to be able to have those, right?
Yeah, no question. What about then sort of as an introspective exercise for someone who is already a partner in a business? How do we be better partners to our partners?
Well, I think it goes back to difficult conversations. If you feel like what's set up is not working, then you have to be willing to sit down and say, hey, I know we thought that this is what was going to happen, but here's what really happened. And I think I'm not satisfied with how this is happening. it's interesting when this happens because I've had this conversation with, dozens of people, and most of the time, when the partner sort of, screws up enough nerve to have the conversation, the other partner says, "I was wondering when you were going to come in and ask me this,"
Mm.
and so that it's like, well, why didn't I? Just so a lot of if you chose a good partner, they understand, where they've excelled and where they haven't, I think, and so you're not going to be knocking them over with some, a blinding revelation of the non-obvious. It was probably pretty obvious, right?
Yeah.